Hey hipsters, it's Blake, the hipster Highlander. I'm back bringing you another deck tech today. Long time no see. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Appreciate your time. Don't forget to do all the algorithm stuff, of course. Today we're going to be talking about a new deck that I've added to my collection. It's Kellen the Fey-Blooded, and most importantly, this is mostly focused around the equipment Sunforger, and we'll get into that in just a second. Killing the Fey-Blooded, though, is 2 in a red for a human fairy. It's a 2-2 with double strike. Other creatures you control get +1/+0 for each aura and equipment attached to Kellen. That's cool and all, but that's not really what we're here for. What we're more here for is Birthrite Boon, which is a adventure that Kellen has. For 1 and a white, it's a sorcery. Search your library for an aura or equipment card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle. So this is just a really consistent way to always tutor up whatever aura and equipment we need. We're more focused around equipment with this deck, and that's kind of our main theme is with a specific equipment. But we'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute, what that equipment is and what it's supposed to do and everything. What our deck is kind of focused around, and the idea for our deck is being more of a Punisher sort of spell slingery deck with an equipment sort of sub package to allow us to facilitate a more consistent, grindy, value engine based deck. This deck is extremely reactive, so if you want to be rewarded for your smart play and good sequencing, this will be a good deck for you. It's a very strange deck, as you don't see often in Boros equipment / spellslinger decks kind of packaged in one. So let's get into kind of the main value engine and most important card in the deck. It's Sunforger. It's 3 mana for an equipment. It equips for 3. It gives the equipped creature +4/+0. But most importantly, it has a very strange ability. For red and a white and unattaching the Sunforger from the equipped creature, you can search your library for a red or white instant card with converted mana cost 4 or less, and you may cast it without paying its mana cost. So this allows us to consistently tutor up and cast cards from our library, specifically instants. The nice thing about it is that you can get kind of whatever you need. We'll get into kind of the toolboxy sort of nature of the deck with all the different options we have. The fun kind of angle I took to take with this deck is to get sort of Punisher-y cards. So if people are, playing too many non-basic lands, if they're playing giant spells, or they like to fill their graveyard a lot, or they're trying to attack you for a bunch, we have a lot of little sort of toolboxy utility cards to turn that kind of around on them. So yeah, Sunforger, as you can see, it's a pretty sweet little card. It's kind of expensive. You got to go in 5 mana each time you want to activate it to get a 4 mana spell. But you do sort of net a card at least on the exchange, because the card you go get and cast was from your library, so it wasn't a card you had access to before. But our goal is to try to cheat that cost as much as we can, as well as develop a lot of mana. So in case we can't cheat that cost, at least we have a lot of mana to do hopefully multiple activations on our turn and then leave it up during our opponent's turn. So let's get into a little bit of how we do that before we get into what Sunforger is actually going and getting. And sort of the main thing with this deck is we want most of our value / development pieces to be equipment, so that way we can always consistently get them. And the 2 most important ones here are Bitterthorn Nissa's Animus and Sword of Fortune Frontier. So Bitterthorn is an equipment, it's a legendary artifact. It has Living Weapon, which means it comes with a germ attached to it. The equipped creature gets +1/+1, and says whenever a equipped creature attacks you, may search your library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. I'm sure this sounds familiar. It's Sword of the Animus, but with the germ. This card's typically much worse than Sword of the Animus, because it's even though it comes with a body, you're not really getting much discount on the cast and equip like you are on Sword of the Animus. And Sword of the Animus, typically you are playing it on like turn 4 and equipping it right away and attacking, getting your land right away. So typically I don't think this card is very good, but it is a really good curve into this deck. The first Kellen activation on 2, you're going to go get your Bitterthorn, put Kellen back in the command zone instead of sending him on an adventure so you can tutor again later. And then you get a very consistent ramp card in Bitterthorn. And then also Sword of Fortune Frontier we can use for that as well. It's a 3 mana equipment, equips for 2. The equipped creature gets +2/+2 in pro red and green. And whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you exile the top 2 cards of your library. You can play them this turn, and you can also play an additional land. Generally, we only get Sword of Fortune Frontier If we already have a few like mana rocks or something where we're developing and we already have a creature out early, which doesn't always happen, but when it does, the Forge and Frontier can be a really nice accelerator, much faster than Bitterthorn. Kind of the main drawback, though, is if we hit some of our Punisher cards or something, it can be a little awkward because they're kind of duds. So you won't always get this one, but it's definitely a very powerful accelerator. So these are kind of our two MVP equipment, I would say. These are basically always the things you'll get first, almost always Bitterthorn with your Birthright Boon, and then you'll send it on back to the command zone instead of on an adventure to get your Sunforger, or maybe one of these next situational equipment like Sword of Feast and Famine and Skull Clamp. These are very powerful equipment, just in general, and especially in this deck, but they're not ones you're always going to go get. They're kind of need a little setup first. So the Feast and Famine is basically just like the Forge and Frontier. The difference here is it gives you pro black and green instead of red and green. And the trigger is different. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card and you untap all your lands. So this one accelerates a lot faster than Forge and Frontier, but you already have to have the lands out. And, normally it can't really draw you any cards like Forge and Frontier can. So Feast and Famine is kind of a good pairing once you already have your Sunforger going or something like that where you just need a ton of mana. Then Feast and Famine is good for that. But typically this is a bit more of a niche pick to grab with your Birthright Boon. But drawing into it always feels good. And then Skull Clamp, you probably know this one too, but I'll read it anyway. It's 1 to cast, 1 to equip. Equipped creature gets +1/-1. When when equipped creature dies, you draw 2 cards. We definitely will have some 1/1s and 1 toughness creatures lying around that we can clamp and get a really good card draw engine going. But it's not always going to be the case. So you're not always going to want to go get this. But if you're short on cards and you got a lot of little idiots lying around that you want to toss to the Skull Clamp, then that's definitely a very powerful card draw engine that you can get. So definitely 2 very powerful equipment, but a bit more situational than the previous. We also have a handful of equipment that come with creatures. So if we need to get some creatures, we can tutor them up a lot easier. And they offer extra utility. So for example, Citizen's Crowbar is 1 and a white for an equipment. It comes attached with a 1/1 green and white citizen. And it equips for 2 later if you need to re-equip it. It gives the equipped creature +1/+1, and it gives the equipped creature the ability to pay a white and tap the creature and sacrifice the crowbar to destroy target artifact or enchantment. So it's a very useful removal spell that we can tutor up. It comes with a body. It's a really good role player to throw extra equipment onto the token and do all that sort of stuff. So very nice card to have access to. Bladehold Warwhip is the next one. It's 1 red and a white, and it has Mirrodin, which means it comes attached to a 2/2 rebel creature token. It makes your equip abilities of your other equipment cost 1 less, and it gives the equipped creature double strike, and it equips for 3 red and a white. We're probably never really re-equipping this, but it's there. So it comes with a 2/2 double strike for 3 mana, and then also discounts your equipment, which is really nice. It allows us to activate our multiple Sunforgers in a turn a lot easier. Even though one's not a huge discount, it can definitely add up. So very useful tool to have in the toolbox as well. And then next up we have a few more creatures that are equipment. Glimmer Lens, it's 1 and a white for an equipment. It has Mirrodin again. Whenever equipped creature and at least 1 other creature attack, you draw a card. It equips for 1 and a white. So just some decent value, sort of consistent card draw. We don't always have 2 equipped creatures just lying around, so this isn't going to trigger like every turn or anything. But even just drawing a few cards here or there is really nice. And then we also have Lion Sash. It's 1 and a white for equipment cat artifact creature. You can pay a white to exile a card from a graveyard. If it's a permanent card, the Lion Sash gets +1/+1. And then also if you choose to equip the Lion Sash, which is reconfigure ability, it gives the equipped creature +1/+1 for each counter on the Lion Sash. So yeah, little incidental graveyard hate. Always need some graveyard hate in your decks. This is one we can tutor up very reliably. So it's definitely very useful. Next up, we're going to move on to some creatures here. We have a handful of creatures because you need things to equip to, right? And the first ones that we have up are kind of the 2 MVPs. These are what really allow us to cheat our Sunforger activations. Fervent Champion and Pure Steel Paladin. You may have forgot about Fervent Champion, but it's 1 red mana for a 1/1. It's a human knight with first strike and haste. It has a trigger that pumps a knight when you attack. That doesn't matter. But most importantly, it has equip abilities you activate that target Fervent Champion cost 3 less to activate. This essentially makes our Sunforger free to equip, so all we have to do is pay one red and a white to unattach it and go get our whatever we want. Really powerful engine, allows us to really chain our Sunforger activations together and get a lot of value. And we get all that on just a 1 red mana creature, so that's excellent. In a similar vein, we have Pure Steel Paladin. It's white for a human knight. It's a 2/2. And whenever an equipment enters the battlefield under your control, you draw a card. And more importantly, it has Metalcraft. If you have 3 or more artifacts, you can equip for free. So just like we talked about with Fervent Champion, that's really important for us. And we might get a card or 2 from the first trigger as well. So definitely the 2 all-star creatures in the deck. You'll basically always like to have them. And we have a few ways to go get them with Imperial Recruiter and Recruiter of the Guard as well. They're basically 3 mana 1/1s that go get you those creatures plus anything that's very small, which is most of our creatures. It includes like the Lion Sash and stuff too, as well as a few creatures that we're about to get into as well. So 3 mana dudes, go get us what we need, and they also can hold equipment sometimes. Very useful. Very good role players that kind of add to the utility toolboxy sort of effect of the deck. These are 2 cards that you may want to get with those recruiters sometimes. It's Brass Squire and Leonin Shikari. These basically allow you to equip at instant speed. In Brass Squire's case, it's a 3 mana 1/3 artifact creature mirror, and you can tap it to attach target equipment you control to target creature you control. Very useful, allows you to re-equip your Sunforger at instant speed, or whatever else. Cheats equip costs once a turn. It's very nice. Just make sure you time this well. Leon Shikari is 1 and a white for a 2/2 cat soldier. You can play equip abilities anytime. You could play an instant. Once again, very useful to chain our Sunforger activations together on our opponent's turn to allow us to be much more reactive. There's no limit on this one. You can just do it whenever you want to, unlike the Brass Squire. But Brass Squire at least gives us the mana discount too. So these are very useful for kind of protecting yourself from your Sunforger activations. Sometimes you might end up in a spot where your opponent's really threatening you. So you try to activate your Sunforger to, protect yourself from that. And then in response, they try to kill your Sunforger while it's not attached to your creature, so you can't activate it again. These allow you to kind of get around that and go over the top of that spell and go get a protection spell. So these are very powerful, very useful. These are really kind of the nail in the coffin once you kind of get your other pieces set up to really stop your opponents from being ever a threat to you. Next up, we have a few utility creatures to kind of round out the creature package. Stoneforge Mystic, you probably know what this one does, but it's a 1 and a white for a Core Artificer. It's a 1/2. When it enters the battlefield, you tutor up an equipment and put it in your hand. Then you can pay 1 and a white and tap it to put an equipment from your hand onto the battlefield. Not really going to activate that second ability very much, but sometimes it might cheat a cost or maybe make it so it's annoying for your opponent to try to kill your equipment that you put in or whatever. It's mostly just for consistency. It's a good creature, holds equipment, can go get an equipment. Just a good card. Monastery Mentor, 2 and a white for a human monk. It has prowess, which means when you cast a non-creature, it gets +1/+1. And then also whenever you cast a non-creature, you get a 1/1 white monk with prowess. So this is just a really good way to go wide and go around our opponents if we need to soften them up for some of our Punisher cards that we'll get into shortly. And it's just a really good kind of take over the board on its own sort of card. Also works well by going wide with Kellen. If you actually play Kellen and equip him, it'll pump up all your little dudes a little bit more too. So that's very useful. And then lastly, for our creature suite, we're just going to round it out with a few other sort of necessary cards. These are Knight of the White Orchid and Loyal Warhound. You know what they do. They're 2 mana. They go get you a land, a basic land, or they go get you a plains if your opponent has more lands than you. We need some ramp in the deck, and these are creatures that can ramp us as well as hold equipment. So they're very useful. And then lastly, to round out our creature suite, we have Esper Sentinel. I'm not going to read through it. You know what it does. It's very good. It holds equipment very well. Draws us cards. It's very useful. Yeah. Nothing else needs to be said. Next, we're going to get up into our instants. These are all the cards that we can get with Sunforger. I looked through basically every card that you could get with Sunforger in this deck 3 or 4 times. So I got a pretty good feeling of what my options are. There's a lot of options in the deck list description, so definitely feel free to check those out if you want to see what some other options that you might like are better than some other things. So definitely things to consider. First off, we're going to talk about the Punisher suite of cards, kind of one of the main things that I theme my deck around. And here's the worst card I've ever put in a commander deck. It's Paraelectric Feedback. It's 3 and a red for an instant. It deals damage to target spell's controller equal to the spell's converted mana cost. You know, sometimes your opponent just really wants to Genesis Wave for 20 or whatever, and you just gotta burn them out with a cool Paraelectric Feedback. If you're building this deck to be like a little bit more optimal, then you probably won't want to include this card because it's really terrible. But man, is this card fun to burn your opponents out with. I've already done it a few times. It feels really good. It's a really fun achievement unlocked thing. I would recommend that you do it for fun, but I would understand if you cut it as well. We're going to get into it next after this too, but we have a copy spell suite as well to help copy these Punisher cards to make them really punishing. So your opponent doesn't necessarily have to cast things for 20, even if they only go in like 7 or 8. Sometimes you can burn them for in the 20 range anyway. So just keep that in mind. And then in a similar vein, we have Price of Progress. This one's much more efficient and powerful. It's 1 and a red for an instant. It deals 2 damage to each player for each non-basic land they control. You know how greedy people are with their mana base. They're going to get got by this card. It's only 2 mana. It's really easy to cast. It's really easy to burn people out. We're a very, very heavy basic deck. We don't really hardly run any utility lands that aren't necessary. So our Price of Progress is not going to hurt us very much. We're built around this card. So these are two very good swingy, like sort of burn spells that can get people out of nowhere, that are very fun and feel very sort of achievement unlocked sort of things. So if you're in for that, those will be fun. Next up are some more sort of protection and insulation spells. We have Comeuppance and Settle the Wreckage. Comeuppance is a weird one. You may have not seen this one because they've never reprinted it for some reason. But it's 3 and a white for an instant. It prevents all damage that would be dealt to you and planeswalkers you control this turn by sources you don't control. If a creature from a source prevented this way, if damage from a creature source is prevented this way, God, even reading this card is hard. Comeuppance deals that much damage to that creature. If damage from a non-creature source is prevented this way, Comeuppance deals that much damage to that source's controller. So this is kind of a fog that also can kill their creatures. But it also acts as like a reverse burn spell sometimes, which can be really fun and cute. So looking forward to this card being reprinted because it's only been printed once and it's like in the $10+ range because it just hasn't ever been reprinted. So if you don't have one of these, I would wait on it. I would recommend. But it's a very cool Punisher utility card that we have for our deck. Next up is Settle the Wreckage. In a similar vein, it's 2 white for an instant. It exiles the attacking creatures target player controls and makes them go get a basic tap for each one. Really good exile board wipe for whoever's trying to threaten you. Very powerful card to have at our disposal to go get with a Sunforger. Pretty sweet. You know, people don't run enough basics, as we already talked about, so they may not even get enough basics to equal all their creatures. So really cool protection insulation spells. Next up, we have a few more Punisher cards. We got Aloran's Searing Light. This is a new one. It's 2 red and a white. Each opponent exiles a creature with the greatest power among creatures that player controls. Okay, that's already awesome. But it also has Spell Mastery. If you have 2 or more instant or sorceries in your graveyard, which we almost always will, this deals damage to each opponent equal to the power of the creature they exiled. So this one's great. This one's a good card to help soften up our opponents for our burn spells that we talked about. And it's also a pretty sweet card. You know, people really like casting their big fatties and being annoying and stuff like that. And this will just get rid of it for good. And it's also a really good card to copy. So we'll get into our copy spells, like I said, shortly. But yeah, really awesome new card that fits perfectly into this deck. Release to Memory, 3 and a white for an instant. Exile target opponent's graveyard. For each creature exiled this way, create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token. So you know, you've always played against those. I'm usually this guy, actually. You know, the people that like to fill up their graveyard and just have it brimming full of creatures and stuff that they want to reanimate. Well, you can get them and even get a board to pay you back for it too. So it's a pretty cute card. There's a few other like exile graveyard instants that I found that you'll see in the considering section on the deck But this is the one that I decided to go with. It seemed like it was the most synergy. And then kind of lastly for our Punisher suite, we have Deflecting Palm. It's red and a white for an instant. The next time a source of your choice would deal damage to you this turn, prevent that damage. If damage is prevented this way, Deflecting Palm deals that much damage to that source's controller. So am I going to take the damage? No, I think you're going to take the damage. Works really good against burn spells like Crackle with Power or whatever if you're tired of dying to those things. If somebody makes a really big unblockable creature, I know that I have a Phage the Untouchable deck. That's kind of my signature deck. So if I ever got with a Deflecting Palm, that'd be pretty sad, but I wouldn't even be mad about it. So yeah, Deflecting Palm, pretty sweet little card. Just kind of, punishes people for their hubris for trying to attack you or deal damage to you. So next up, we're going to go on to the copy spells in the deck that I've been talking about. First up, the two most important ones are Repeated Reverberation and Fury Storm. Both of them are 2 red. In Repeated Reverberation's case, it makes the next instant you cast copy twice. And Fury Storm copies a spell plus copies it again for each time you cast your commander from the command zone. So notably, the important distinction here is Repeated Reverberation is the effect that we prefer more, because it's way easier to chain into our Sunforger sort of effects. If we go get a copy spell and then cast it, and then we have to then re-equip and cast the card that we get from Sunforger again. So with copies like Fury Storm, the spell has to be on the stack. With Sunforger, you can't really like re-equip and like cheat it and like do all that. So generally, Fury Storm's going to be like in your hand, or the spell that you want to cast and copy is going to have to be in your hand. Basically, you have to find a way to put the spell on the stack first and then copy it if you want to use it with Fury Storm. Well, Repeated Reverberation doesn't make you have to have that hoop to jump through. That being said, Fury Storm, typically we're going to get like 3 copies off of something for 4 mana. That's still plenty worth it, so I still run this one. And it still is nice with the instant speed equip effects. I still find it worth it. But yeah, in general, we much prefer the Repeated Reverberation sort of effects, so you'll see that reflected in the next copy spells as well. Dual Strike and Twinferno, they essentially do the same thing. The next instant or sorcery you cast, you get to copy. In Dual Strike's case, you can foretell it for a red. In Twinferno's case, you can also choose to give a creature you control double strike, which I've done once, but I wouldn't recommend you doing that. It's probably almost never worth it. But yeah, just 2 versions of that sort of copy spell that we're looking for, like I mentioned. Next up, we're going to get into some card draw spells, some spells you may want to copy outside of your Punisher effects. We got Big Score and Unexpected Windfall. They're essentially the same card. They're 4 mana, they're red. You have to discard a card as part of the cast, and you draw 2 and make 2 treasure. Notably, when you copy these, you're not casting the copy, so you don't have to pay the additional cost. So you go up a decent amount of cards. You have some extra mana lying around with your tokens and stuff. So very good role players in the deck. In a similar vein, we have Thrill of Possibility and Electric Revelation. They do the same thing. When you cast them, you have to discard a card, and then you draw 2 cards. In Thrill's case, it's 2 mana. Electric Revelation's 3 mana. But Electric Revelation also has a flashback for 4 mana. So it has some, sort of late game mana sync option in it too. Once again, good role players, good cards to copy if we need more cards in our hand. And then lastly, for our card draw suite, we have Valakut Awakening. It's 2 and a red for an instant. You can put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library, and then draw that many cards plus 1. This card's really nice for the deck, as it allows us to kind of put our Punisher cards that we may not want in our hand back in our library, and then draw an extra card. And this card is even good to like go get from your deck with Sunforger and copy and such, as we still net cards on the situation. We can get rid of extra lands, or like I said, the Punisher cards that we don't necessarily want to draw but have access to. So yeah, Valakut Awakening, and the worst case scenario is just a tapped land. So definitely a really powerful role player. You know me, I love my little DFCs. And then next up, we're going to start getting into our interaction suite. So first up, we're going to start with some protection spells. We got Blacksmith Skill and Lauren's Escape. They're both 1 white mana for instance. They both protect a permanent. So in Blacksmith Skill's case, it protects target permanent by giving it hexproof and indestructible till end of turn. And then if it's an artifact creature, it gets +2/+2. That's not really relevant. It just protects one thing for really cheap. Lauren's Escape kind of does the same thing. Target artifact or creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, and then you scry one. So these are really good cards to protect with our Sunforger with, and whatever, maybe the thing that it's equipped to if they only have creature removal or whatever. The nice thing about these is they're really good cards to hold up alongside of a Sunforger activation, because most of the time you're only going to get one shot at your Sunforger activation during your opponent's turns to be reactive. So this allows you to activate them and feel a little bit more comfortable with being vulnerable to your Sunforger being maybe interacted with. So definitely very good role players, even though they may look a little inconsequential. White actually has a few counter spells. These are the two that I've kind of decided to put in the deck. There's a few more in the deck list if you want to take a look at them. Lapse of Certainty is the first one. It's 2 and a white for an instant. You counter spell, and then the spell goes on top of the library instead of their graveyard. It's just Memory Lapse, just for 3 mana. Very useful. I've been very happy with this card. It's a good catch-all. Putting it on the top of the library is really not that big of a deal, because if they want to try to do it again that turn, they have to draw it with a spell and then cast it again. So it's very unlikely that they'll have access to that card again that turn, if it's really that much of a problem for you. And even then, the next turn when you go around, you have time to react to it and know it's coming again, so you'll be better equipped to deal with it. But yeah, Lapse of Certainty, a very good catch-all for the deck. In a similar vein, Reprieve is next. It's 1 and a white for an instant. You return target spell to its owner's hand and you draw a card. So this one you don't even go down on the situation, but they have a little bit more access to the card still in their hand. So yeah, but it's still a very good interaction piece. Really useful to have on the deck. And then next up for our sort of last cards for our protection suite is Teferi's Protection. I'm not going to read this one. You know what it does. It's very powerful. It's a good catch-all protection spell for everything, including your life total. Just note that it exiles itself when you cast it, so you're only going to get one shot of it with your Sunforger, so use it wisely. And then we also have Scroll Shift. It's 2 and a white for an instant. You can exile up to one target artifact, creature, or enchantment you control, and then you return it to the battlefield and draw a card. I've actually been pretty impressed with this card in the deck. I kind of threw it in as just like a, maybe I want to run some flicker effects or whatever. This one's actually really nice to go tutor up and flicker something when it's being singly targeted with a removal spell or something. You go up a card on the exchange, and even you might go up a second one, because we have lots of things that have ETBs, as you've seen in the deck and will continue to see. So yeah, Scroll Shift has been a very good card for the deck. Actually, it's been a good role player. I've been pretty happy with it. Next up, we're going to start getting into more interaction spells. Boros Charm technically you can use as a protection spell, but I've tend to use it for its first mode. So Boros Charm is 1 and a red for an instant. Choose one. It deals 4 damage to target player. Permanents you control gain indestructible till end of turn, or target creature gains double strike till end of turn. Yeah, like I said, unironically, I've actually used this thing for the 4 damage mode more than anything. As like an alternative burn spell if my Price of Progress or my Pyroelectric Feedback aren't working out or something. But the fallback of like giving my permanents indestructible is really nice too. And I've even used the last mode before on one of my opponent's very large creatures to help kill another opponent. So Boros Charm's a very good role player for the deck for sure. Next up, a card you may have not heard of before. It's called Oh my god, I can't even read. Scorn. Yep, that's it. It's 3 and a white for an instant. If you've played another white spell this turn, you may cast it without paying its mana cost, and it destroys all enchantments. So we haven't gotten to enchantments yet, but we only have 2 in the deck, and they mostly do their thing just when they enter and stuff anyway. So yeah, this is kind of a very good, useful card to have access to. Enchantments are not typically something that a lot of people can deal with, so having a kind of catch-all sort of answer to, nope, let's just get rid of all of them at once is really nice. There's another version of this card called Tempest of Light, which is white and 2 and does the same thing, but doesn't have the free casting mode like this one does. So I like this one a little bit better, but just note that card exists too. Let's keep moving into the removal suite here. We have Excise the Imperfect and Generous Gift next. They both get rid of permanents and give your opponent some inconsequential creature. In Excise the Imperfect's case, it exiles a non-land permanent in the Incubate X, where X is the mana value of the thing you exile. Really like exile removal on the Excise the Imperfect, and the missing out on land permanents is rarely relevant. But we do have Generous Gift to kind of catch land permanents if we need to. It blows up any permanent, gives your opponent a 3/3. 3/3 doesn't matter, basically, ever. So, yeah, good catch-all removal spells here when we need to get rid of our opponent's stuff. Path to Exile and Swords. I'm not going to read them. They exile creatures and give your opponent some very small upside. So, but just note that Path is sometimes useful on your own creature if you have a few tokens lying around and you want to ramp a land with it. I've definitely done that with this deck and other decks. So, yep, very good interaction cards for sure for creatures. And we also have Wear Tear, which is a fuse card. It has 2 modes, but you can cast both of them. So Wear they're both instants. Wear destroys an artifact for 1 and a red, and Tear destroys an enchantment for a white mana. It's a really good card to go get with your Sunforger since you can cast both sides of it. You can cast the whole thing. So it's kind of like a Return to Dust that you can actually use during your opponent's turn. More accurately, it's a Crush Contraband, which is 1 more mana than this, which you could also include in the deck if you really wanted to, but I've been happier with Wear Tear and the suite that I have. Lastly, we have Argavian Fine. This is a little bit of recursion for the deck. It's 1 white mana for an instant. Return target artifact or enchantment from your graveyard to your hand. Good card to get our Sunforger back. We can also tutor it up with the Sunforger if we want to get a different equipment or enchantment back. So very useful to have access to for sure. And it's ultra cheap at 1 white mana. So instant speed is also really nice. Alright, so let's get into the 2 enchantments that we have. We have Forge Anew and Fighter Class. Forge Anew is 2 and a white for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you can return an equipment from your graveyard to the battlefield. That's pretty useful. As long as it's your turn, you may activate abilities anytime you can cast an instant. That's also very useful, as we just talked about. And then you may pay 0 rather than the equip cost of the first equip ability you activate during each of your turns. That is also very useful. So mostly we like the first and last mode on this. Getting the first discount on your Sunforger activation is really nice. Also, getting some recursion for your equipment is very good. Most of the time we'll be getting back like our swords or whatever, obviously, because most of the time we'll protect our Sunforger over our swords. But yeah, really good role player. Like I said, if this happens to die to our enchantment board wipe or whatever, it's not the biggest deal. We usually get most of our value up front with this one. Fighter Class is red and a white for an enchantment class. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for an equipment, reveal it, put it in your hand. We've already talked about how that's good. And then also it has a level 2 mode that we also care about for 1 red and a white. Equip abilities you activate cost 2 less to activate. Unlike the Forge Anew, that's just all the time. It's not just your first activation. So it allows us to equip our swords for free, our Sunforger for 1. Very powerful. The last mode on the Fighter Class doesn't matter. You'll never activate it. So yeah, very useful. The 2 enchantments that we do play are very good. They get most of their value up front, and they do like to be flickered too. So Scroll Shift even doing a little bit more work. We do have 1 sorcery in the deck. It's Steel Shaper's Gift. 1 white mana for a sorcery. Search your library for equipment. Put it in your hand. Shuffle. So, yep, we've already talked about how this effect's good plenty of times. This one's just ultra efficient at what it does. So, it's worth the include. Alright, we do have 10 mana rocks in the deck. I'm just going to show you 2 of them because they're kind of the 2 that do basically something else besides being just a mana rock. And that's Liquid Metal Torque and the Iron Crag. Liquid Metal Torque can turn a non-land permanent into an artifact, making it easier to hit with a Wear Tear or whatever. So that can be useful sometimes, but obviously it's mostly here for a mana rock. And the Iron Crag can sometimes turn into an equipment that gives something +3/+3, which we'll probably rarely ever do, but might be notable at some point. It's a good thing to give to Kellen since he has double strike, so not nothing, but yeah, they're mostly mana rocks. And then we're just going to move into the land suite. Like I said, we have tons of basics in the deck. We run a few fixing lands, obviously, but I wanted to highlight sort of one special thing, and that's Mistveil Plains. It's a land, but it has the land type Plains. It comes into play tapped, and it has the ability where you can pay white and tap it, put target card in your graveyard on the bottom of your library, and you can only activate this ability if you have 2 or more white permanents. So this card is very powerful in this deck. It allows you to reuse the instants that you've Sunforged already and put into your graveyard. It allows you to put them back in your deck and Sunforge them again, which is really nice. Because you don't really care if they're on the bottom, you're going to search them up anyway. So Mistveil Plains is a very, very good role player. And in a similar vein, I would recommend you run any white fetches that you have. So obviously I have Arid Mesa here to represent that. But if you have like a Marsh Flats, Windswept Heath, Flooded Strand, if you have any of those, I would highly recommend that you put them in the deck too, so you can more reliably get your Mistveil Plains. But yeah, other than that, you have your normal suite of a handful of the good fixing lands. So you can see the deck list for those. You know what they look like. Lastly, I kind of wanted to get into a few notable excludes, some that just didn't quite make the cut for various reasons that I'll go over, outside of just the large suite of instants. These are the ones that I considered the most, and some other things. So Clever Concealment's the first one. It's 2 white for an instant. It has Convoke. Any number of target non-land permanents you control phase out. So this allows you to protect anything on your board. If I want another protection spell for my board, this would be the one I would go to next. It notably, when you phase things out, it also does phase out anything attached to it. Not that this one, it matters in this case, because you can also phase out the equipment too or whatever, so that's not super relevant in this case, but just in case you decide to run some other phase-in cards or whatever, just know that that's how that works. So yeah, if I want another protection spell for the deck, this is probably the one I'd go to next if I didn't want to do another white counterspell or something, because the other white counterspells are a bit worse than the 2 that I included. And then next up, we got Delayed Blast Fireball. It's 1 red for an instant. It deals 2 damage to each opponent and each creature they control, or it does 5 damage to those if you cast it from exile. And it also has foretell for 4 red. So I definitely have been considering putting a one-sided Pyroclasm in the deck. There's a few of them at 3 mana, but most of them are like deal damage to non-dragons or non-pirates or whatever. This one just happens to be the one that is exclusively one-sided. And then it also has the rare mode for this deck of casting it from exile, which we probably wouldn't ever do almost ever. But yeah, just a 3 mana one-sided Pyroclasm seems like an effect that I might want. So this would be the one that I would include if I do decide to go that route. You probably were wondering if I was including these in the deck, Hammer of Nazan and Sigarda's Aid, and I'm not actually. And here's sort of why. So they're basically, the important thing is that they allow you to attach equipment when they come into play. In Hammer of Nazan's case, it also gives that creature +2/+0 and indestructible. And in Sigarda's Aid's case, it allows you to flash in the equipment. I haven't found these to be impactful enough. Sure, they help you cheat the equip cost of the first time you like cast your Sunforger or your swords or whatever. But we don't have that many equipment that like need to be equipped. Like a lot of our equipment like come with creatures and kind of already do their thing. Sure, like cheating the first Sunforger activation is nice, but do I want to spend a card on that? Not necessarily. If I was going to run one of these, it would probably be the Hammer, because at least that one I can tutor up. Sigarda's Aid, I tried both of these out in the deck. Sigarda's Aid I found to be, if I drew it later in the game, it was just like a pretty dead draw, and that's really not where I wanted to be, as we really need all the cards we have access to. We don't have like infinite card draw or anything like that, so yeah, I would definitely run Hammer of the 2 of these first, but even then I found Hammer to not be worth running. It's just not really impactful enough, at least in the build that I have. And then lastly, I have Stormkill Martis. This is kind of a stand-in for the creatures that care about casting instants and sorceries specifically. Stormkill Martis is probably the best one of these. It's 3 and a red for a 2/2. It gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control, and it has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, you create a treasure. So here's the thing with this deck is if you're already like casting and copying instant or sorceries, you're kind of already like doing your thing. A few treasures here and there is like nice, or 1/1s or whatever the spell slingery card you have in play does. Like all that stuff's like cool and stuff, but if we're doing the spell slingery thing, we're kind of already, we're already kind of just chilling. We're already doing our thing. We don't really need this. The initial investment of this is just too high. We'd much rather activate Sunforger an extra time during that turn or something. So yeah, like this and Young Pyromancer and those sort of cards are cards that you could run, but I don't know. They don't seem worth it. I tried them. I was very unimpressed with them. They just don't do enough. I'd just rather have a few more instances in the deck and kind of increase my sort of utility suite. Or hey, I'd even rather grab like another Firmiridan equipment or something, just for consistency. So yeah, that's basically the end of the deck tech. Please check the description for the deck list, as well as a ton of options that you could choose to run if there's a specific equipment that you weren't impressed with, or an instant or sorcery that you'd rather run than something else. You could definitely take out the sort of Punisher effects of this deck and run a bunch of like token generators, so that way you can go wider and do that sort of thing instead, and then actually play Kellen a little more and equip him with more stuff, and then have a pretty impressive wide board. That's definitely an option that you can do. I've been very happy with this deck. I've had a lot of fun with it. I found it to be quite effective. It allows it allows you to have a lot of smart plays and feel really rewarded for being reactive and all that sort of stuff. So it's definitely my style of deck, and hopefully it's your style of deck. I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to do the algorithm stuff. Much love. Take care.